Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the September Tuleyome Nature and You lecture series. I'm going to start out just with a quick introduction of Tuleyome. First of all, my name is Bill Grabert. I'm with Tuleyome, and Tuleyome is a conservation nonprofit. We're based out of Woodland, and our concentration is the northern inner coast range of California. So that is the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument area. So if you're in Yolo County or you're in the Sacramento Valley, you look to the west and the north, those are those mountains. And what we're doing is we really want people to learn those mountains, get to know those mountains. They're kind of unknown for most of the people that even live nearby, and appreciate them because there's some really, really beautiful areas up there. It's kind of a harsh environment this time of year, but if you get into the winter and the spring, they're just incredibly spectacular. So highly encourage everybody to go up there. Just a little bit of instruction on Zoom. You're probably all very familiar with Zoom at this point, but we are going to be using the chat feature of Zoom, which means if you have questions, just go into the chat feature. I'll just send a little welcome message to everyone and you can see where it is. And you enter your message. And if it's something that is worthy of interrupting the speaker, I will. Otherwise, we'll just wait and answer the questions at the end of the talk. Next month's speaker is the Friends of the Eel River, and they'll be talking about the headwaters of the Eel River and what are plans for the Eel River into the future. So that will be October 26th, I believe. It's the fourth Thursday of the month. Our speaker for tonight is Greg Kareofelas. He's been living in this area for many, many decades, and he has been going up into those mountains that I was just talking about. And he is an associate of the UC Davis Bohart Museum of Entomology. So without further ado, Greg.
Okay, so I'm going to hit share screen. Does everybody have you have the picture now, Bill?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, ready to go?
Yep.
Welcome everybody, thank you for coming. And I hope you enjoy what we're going to be learning in this little talk. Even as a little kid, I somehow knew that life wasn't going to stay the same, that there was always going to be changes. When I would be a kid walking across Woodland, an old house that was familiar to me would get torn down. And I kind of expected that I would see that kind of change. I always have figured that the change that I would see was going to be small change. That somehow these huge things that would be way, way different would not happen in my lifetime. As you're going to see, the changes are not just small anymore. This is a talk that I put together a couple of years ago to give to various entomology and plant organizations. And I just wanted to share an area that I've enjoyed for a long time. And to me, it was really special. And I was really happy to see when Tuleyome was really responsible for getting the Snow Mountain area, preserved the way that it is now. I like the area because of roads like this. If you knew what you were doing, you could basically start along the top end of Lake Berryessa and drive all the way to Red Bluff, never being on anything other than a little small 2-lane road, other than a quick jump that you have Highway 20 by Lower Lake to get up to Walker Ridge. So this area was always special. And when I say my first introduction to it was in 1960, thanks to my Uncle John, who is standing at the right here, who took me into this area because we were bow hunters. And so this is the place called Poison Rock, which is right on the side of Plaskett Meadows. So starting in 1960, I started to appreciate just how wonderful this whole area was. I'm at the left with the binoculars looking off into the distance. As soon as I graduated from high school, I went to college. When I graduated from college, I immediately got drafted. This was 1967. When I got back from overseas in 1969, it took a year or two before I got a job and got enough money to buy a car that I could finally start getting back into this area again. And this picture right here, to me, showed what I liked about this area. So when I say the inner North Coast Range, here I'm standing at the top of Walker Ridge and I'm looking over Bear Valley. So this country pretty much from, when you, like I say, get to the top of Lake Berryessa, you pretty much have a mountain range which has a ridge. There's usually a little valley between this mountain range and what I would call the coast range that you see when you drive up 5. This picture shows, you're looking out over the Great Sacramento Valley, and off into the distance, you can barely see the Sierra. This is a little map that I made of the area when I first started keeping data when we got computers back in the 1980s. I wanted to start recording what I was seeing here. So you can see at the bottom end, I started with Quail Ridge. Between Quail Ridge is where Bear Valley is. You get to Goat Mountain, and at the top end is Plaskett Meadows. And that's pretty much the area that I was going to concentrate on. The reason that this area is so special is the incredible geology that this area has. I really like the serpentine, the green rock, which slowly weathered into the red soils and created an environment that only certain plants could live in. Serpentine soils have chemicals that most plants aren't too happy with and lack chemicals that most plants need. So the only plants that would grow on serpentine are ones that either could handle those conditions or were endemic to it. As you'll find out as we go through the talk, some of these plants became very special to butterflies. Also, you can see some of the tremendous forces that created this part of California. The thing that makes it really special are going to be the habitats that we can find in this country. Some of my favorite when you first start entering into it, you're going to have grasslands, blue oak woodlands, Pinus sabiniana trees, and a little bit of California juniper. This created a really important diverse habitat that we'll see when we start talking about some of the butterflies. Wherever you had a riparian corridor, you ended up with a different set of plant communities. And again, you're going to have different insects associated with this area. At the top end, you would have snow back in the before times. It would stay sometimes late into July. This would be in the Plaskett Meadows area and the red fir forest that was there. Making this special are going to be the elevations of some of these mountains. As you can see, these 5 mountains all range from 6,000 to about 7,000 feet. These are the highest elevation, southernmost mountains on this little range of the Inner Coast Range. This was always one of my favorite little views of Snow Mountain. This is from Stony Ford, looking across the valley. St. John's Mountain is off to the right. Snow Mountain with snow on it is off to the left. When you get up into some of the higher elevations, you entered into these wonderful wet meadow areas. Again, these are some of the areas that are going to help account for a lot of the diversity that we're going to start talking about soon. This was always a favorite. This is an ancient Ice Age lake that is slowly turning into a meadow. So early in the year, in a wet year, it's going to have about 1 or 2 inches of water over it, which will dry out. And just, again, incredible plant communities give us incredible insect communities. At the top end, we're going to have a different kind of oak grassland. This is going to be pretty much all native grasses, but instead of being blue oaks, these are going to be Oregon white oaks. So with that kind of diversity, I decided that I was going to study butterflies. And the reason that I chose butterflies is being from Davis, I had access to the Bohart Museum of Entomology. I had access to some of the really premier entomologists from Northern California. So I've always been able to have help in anything that I needed, dealing with identification, questions, and just to be able to share what I've been able to find. So all of the data that I've been collecting from here gets shared with Shapiro. So he knows what this area is also. Now, California, when you think about California, the hundreds of miles of coastline, the different habitat down in San Diego, the Sonora Desert, the Mojave Desert, the high elevations of Sierra, Great Basin, Modoc, Klamath area up at the north end by Oregon, the Great Valley, the Intercoast Range. California has about 235 different species of butterfly. In the Goat Mountain Plaskett Meadows area, I recorded 104 different species. What this says is this one little area of California, I can find just about half of the butterflies that are found in California. I could find places like this where you had mint covered with hundreds of butterflies, many, many different species. And then we started the fires. Now these areas have always had fires, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But to me, the Knoxville fire was the one that really kind of opened my eyes. This is a fire that started burning. Actually, I think it started burning on the Gwinda side of the mountains, crossed over, ultimately ended up burning all the way to the top end of Berryessa and burned all the way through the McLaughlin Preserve. Okay, I said, I won't go there for a few years. I'll concentrate on the Goat Mountain, Plaskett Meadows area. Then there was the ranch fire. The ranch fire pretty much burned a lot of the Knoxville area again, burned all of the Goat Mountain area, and it got just about to Plaskett Meadows, stopping at a place called Kneecap Ridge. I went, okay, I'll skip Goat Mountain for a few years and concentrate at Plaskett Meadows. Then we had the August Complex. To talk about what all of these fires had, I mean, we all know the life cycle of a butterfly. The egg hatches to a caterpillar, makes a chrysalis, which becomes an adult. But we're going to think about this in terms of what do fires mean to the butterflies that were living in this area. I'm going to also talk about flight. Now, when I say flight, I'm going to mean the time of a butterfly's existence from the time that the egg was laid until it became an adult. Now, many times that can be a period of only about a month, but 11 months of the year, that butterfly is someplace else. Diapause is kind of the word that we use for butterflies. It basically is like hibernation. When a butterfly isn't flying, where is it? Some of the butterflies will use the egg. A butterfly will lay an egg and it's going to stay an egg for most of the year. Next year it'll hatch to a larva and become an adult eventually. Some of them, it's the larva. Some of them, it's the chrysalis, and some of them, it's the adult. So depending upon the species, any one of those 4 stages can be the stage that allows a butterfly to get through a time of the year that's not conducive to being an adult butterfly. Think the middle of winter. Some butterflies move and some do not. What do I mean by that? Think a monarch or a painted lady, which can fly hundreds, if not thousands of miles. Some butterflies, like Euphaloides, will live its entire life as an adult, as an egg, as a caterpillar, as a chrysalis, and not venture farther than maybe 10 feet from the host plant that it lived on. So a fire is going to affect butterflies that can fly and butterflies that don't move around a whole lot in a completely different way. Now, happy home. This is what I describe as being that place that I knew that I could go find a specific butterfly at a specific time. That might have been a place that was shaded in a deep forest. It might have been a place that had a little stream, a spring, a set of plants. It was a place that a certain species of butterfly was very happy in. So in other words, of those 104 butterflies that I recorded in Plaskett Meadows and Goat Mountain, you could not find those all through the area. You had to know which little spot to go to find a specific species. July 7th, 2020 became kind of an important date to me. An entomology student had been asking me for a long time. She wanted to visit Plaskett Meadows because she'd heard me talking about it. July 7th, 2020, we were right in the middle of COVID. None of us were vaccinated. So I just couldn't put her in the car that I was going to be driving in, but she didn't have a car that would be able to follow me into any of these areas. And so building a little divider in my car, I was able to have her sit in the back seat, me sit in the front seat and be separate and go to Plaskett Meadows. And how glad I was. I had a chance to visit all of the places that I like to go, and they were all beautiful. Less than 5 weeks later was August 16th, 2020. 12,000 lightning strikes hit Northern California. 600 fires started. And in my area, 1 million+ acres ended up burning. In May of this year, I went back to Plaskett Meadows, basically to the same place that I had been on July the 7th. Now, don't be deceived by that beautiful green meadow there, because what that is really telling you is that that entire meadow burned to the ground. But because these were all rhizomatous plants, and this is a wet meadow, and so it was getting water, those plants sprung back. But look under the forest that's burned off to the side. You see nothing green there. That's because most of the area did not green up. Most of the area stayed very, very burned. Road closed meant it was difficult for me to get to check out some of these places. I couldn't get into a lot of the places. In fact, just recently they closed all of these national forests and only reopened them, I think, last Saturday. So what I wanted to do is we're going to talk about the butterflies that I've seen now. And what I had done in my original talk is, for example, subfamily skippers. I've recorded 23 different species here. Now, there wasn't really enough time to talk about all 23 species. And so what I had done originally is I picked out what I consider to be the 6 special ones that you wouldn't normally see anyplace else, ones that you had to know where to go look for to find them, ones that were special. And so we'll talk about the special butterflies that I found in the Plaskett Meadows Goat Mountain area. The little white skipper at the top here, Aristatorum. This is mostly a tropical species. Get up here under special conditions, and it can form little colonies that can persist for a year, 2 or 3 years. It just depends. The next butterfly down, Palomon, is called the Arctic skipper. It's kind of unique because it's a whole Arctic species. You can find the same exact butterfly in Siberia. You can find it many other places in the world. But the place that I found it in Plaskett Meadows was its southernmost occurrence in California. In fact, probably the world. Lindsay, which looks just like every little tan skipper that you've probably seen, but Lindsay is a very local one. It would come out very early in the year. It lived on native grasses only, whereas the little tan skippers that you see in your yard can live in Bermuda. Lindsay has to have a native grass. It found that in a few places in both the Plaskett Meadows and Goat Mountain area. The top two skippers on the right, Comma and Sabuleti. These can be found in a lot of other places in California, but the way these acted, probably these would have deserved to have their own subspecies name attached to it. I know Shapiro always thought that these were different somehow. Amblyoscurtes bialis is another very rare little skipper that I could only find in a very few places in the Plaskett Meadows area. It was so unusually not commonly seen that I never really got a good feel for what made it where I found it. But the places that I found it, I can tell you, are now gone. And this was just a pretty little picture of Lindsay nectaring on milkweed. I include it just because in May, when I went to visit Plaskett Meadows, the spot that I took this picture was totally burned up. Swallowtails. Usually, even if you don't know butterflies, people usually know swallowtails. The two swallowtails that I consider to be special in this area are Indra. Indra would be found usually on serpentine peaks. It was found in the Knoxville area. It was found in the Goat Mountain area. It was found in the Plaskett Meadows area. Paleo Multicadadis is the two-tailed swallowtail. It looks very much like the normal tiger swallowtail that you're familiar with in town here. But if you'll see, it does have two tails. It's bigger. The reason I include it as being special is that it lived on a tree called Oregon ash. All of the trees that were Oregon ash that I knew to find this butterfly all burned into both the Goat Mountain fire and the Plaskett Meadows fire. This butterfly would have been a caterpillar in August. So if you were a caterpillar when that fire came through, you would not have been able to move out of its way. Pierrots. Pierrots are the familiar little white and yellow butterflies. 11 different species were recorded in the area. The two that I consider to be special is Coleus Oxidentalis, Chrysomeless. Coleus, which is the genus for all of the yellow butterflies that you're familiar with. Oxidentalis, because this was called the Western sulfur. Chrysomeless, because it is golden. This is the sulfur butterfly that was found in forest rather than in meadows. All of the other butterflies in this family, all the other yellow butterflies that you're familiar with, all like things like alfalfa fields, meadows. This butterfly was found in the forest. And again, the areas that I would find this butterfly all burnt. Its host plant was lupin, and it would have been making chrysalis lupin. It burned up. So whether this butterfly survived or not, I don't know. Eurydice, this is the California dogface. the state insect of California. Even though its host plant can handle fire, Amorpha californica will root sprout after burning. But it's just that a fire in August would have probably wiped out both chrysalis and caterpillars that would have been on those plants. So again, all of the areas that I knew to find this butterfly totally burned. This is a picture of the golden sulfur from the side view to see why it got named golden sulfur. It's puddling here, getting moisture at a place at Goat Mountain that I used to find it. The crazy white butterfly that I'm most worried about is this one. All other white butterflies use plants in the Brassicaceae family, mustards. This one lives on pine trees. If you've ever chewed on a pine needle, you can imagine this is what this butterfly's caterpillar lived on, pine needles. The one that I call early is the normal pine white. If you would be in any forest environment, I'll say at 4,000 or 5,000 feet elevation, and you look up at the top of pine trees and you saw a little white butterfly flying up there, you were looking at a pine white. It's a common butterfly that was found all through this area. It's all found in Northern California, in the Klamath area. It's also found in the Sierras. There's nothing really super special about the early pine white. The one that's called late, for some reason, there was a second flight of pine white. It flew in two little small locations, one on Goat Mountain, one in Plaskett Meadows. It came out in late October and November. Most people were not in the mountains looking for butterflies at that time, and so most people had never seen this butterfly. Shapiro and his group did a bunch of studies on it and pretty much proved it probably could receive a different name. Whether it's still there or not is going to be the big question. All of the pine trees that I would find this butterfly on totally burned in both the ranch fire and in the August complex. Lycaenid butterflies, coppers, hair streaks, and blues. Coppers, so named because they tend to have a copperish color. The two that I chose as being special is the tailed copper, Baroda, and Xanthoides. The tailed copper I could find in two places in the Goat Mountain area. It's very common if you get onto the eastern side of the Sierras. It's common in Northern California, but finding it in the Inner Coast Range, it was only found in a very short two places. Xanthoides, I don't know what to say about this butterfly. It used to be found right outside of Davis in the Willow Slough bypass before that turned into a total weed patch and his host plant disappeared. So it was mostly a butterfly that you would expect to find flying early in the year in the valley. We found it at a few places in both the Goat Mountain area and the Plaskett Meadows area late in the year. It lives on rumex. Rumex is a plant that grows sometimes along roadsides. And so being that its host plant might have escaped some of the fire, this butterfly might have survived. This is a picture of the tail copper doing what tail copper males would love to do, and that is perch on the host plant, ribes. And what he is saying here is to all of the females, I am on the coolest plant ever. This is where you're going to want to lay your eggs. Choose me. He would fly off and chase any other male that got close to him. I included this picture because when I went back to the area in Goat Mountain where this was taken, that whole area was totally burned. Hair streaks. Butterflies that most people will never notice or pay attention to. You'll probably just see it and think that it was a little brown moth. The prettiest one is the top one, Coleus. This is actually a tropical butterfly. All of its relatives are going to fly south of Mexico. Spinatorum and johnsoni. All three of these butterflies, their host plant are mistletoes, which means they're living in the high trees, and so they rarely come down out of the high trees, which is why most people never notice them. But as we found out, when there's forest fires, living in high trees is not a cool place to be living. So again, how much mistletoe has survived the fires will determine whether these butterflies survived. The Tuleyome, the top one on the right, its host plant are plants that grow only in serpentine, Sargent cypress and McNabb cypress. Both of those trees did not really survive well in the fire. Moss eye is a little elfin. It lived on sedum. And I'm kind of hoping, because sedum is a plant that grows in somewhat wet areas, I hope that the sedum survived, and maybe this butterfly had a chance of surviving. But being that those places where this sedum live are way up on roads that I haven't been able to access yet, I haven't been able to get in and check that out yet. Blues. All 10 of these species are cool, but I had to pick 2 of them. And I picked the one that's called the arrowhead blue, which is Piasis on the left, and Lupini, which is the one on the right. Both of these butterflies were very rarely found anywhere within the Coast Range. And the places that I always knew to find them were areas that were really severely burned in the fires. Rhyodinid, Mormo only flew in one little spot in the Goat Mountain area. And I went and checked out that area about 2 weeks ago. And I sat there in the place that it should have been flying at this time of the year, and it was not there. Nymphalids are butterflies that most normal people notice, because they do noticeable things. They fly, like this one, they're landing with, a warm spring day. It picks a spot in the sun, lands, picks up sunshine, warms up, will fly around, come back to the spot, warm up again. I picked, of those 27, 4 that I consider to be special. Igleus is a frit. And if you don't know the life cycle of the frits, these butterflies fly in the summertime. They're very commonly, anytime you go into any meadow in the Sierras, any meadow in the Coast Range, any meadow in Northern California, you would see frits flying if you were there June and July. If you just went into a meadow where there were flowers blooming, that picture I showed of the mints were covered with frits. This frit, Igleus, was described as its own subspecies from an area it flew on Anthony Peak. Now, the fritillaries fly as adult butterflies in the summertime. A lot of times the female will go hide in the hottest part of summer. So August, it will be hidden. She'll come out again at the end of August, early September, and she will lay an egg. The host plant for all of the frits are violets. Now, if you're a plant person, you know violets don't grow in the summertime. In fact, a violet is a little annual plant. It's going to grow. It's one of the first plants that's going to sprout early in this, late in the winter almost, early in the spring. So it will lay an egg where it thinks there were violets last year. That egg is going to hatch in October of this year as a caterpillar the size of an egg. Now, if you see the little top part of the antenna here, that's about the size of a threat egg. So if you imagine a caterpillar coming out of an egg that size, it will now hunker down where it is and wait October, November, December, January, February, depending upon whether it was under snow or whether it was just cold weather, for that violet to grow. It will then feed on a violet. So that caterpillar, 1 or 2 days old, the size of that egg, it's not going to be able to crawl too far. So if it doesn't find a violet very quickly, it will not survive. I don't know how this butterfly is going to survive when I saw how much of this area burned. Leonera, I could find this butterfly in 1 or 2 spots in the Goat Mountain area. Both of those areas, when they were doing fire prevention and scraping roads around, totally buried the area that I used to find this butterfly. So I don't know if I'll ever see this butterfly again. Campestris, this butterfly is common on the east side of the Sierra. It's common in the Delta. It used to be common in the valley. I found it in one special spot in the Plaskett Meadows area. I visited that meadow and that totally burned. I have no idea whether the butterfly will survive. Edith's checker spot is a butterfly that usually would be able to survive forest fires. It lives mostly in the chaparral areas. Its host plant is pedicularis. And if you know pedicularis, it usually that if there's going to be a fire, that will be a spot that there will be a fire. And it's been able to survive the fires that we've had up till now. But the fires that we've had recently have just been so huge and so hot that the areas that it used to be found in, the Knoxville area, the area just before you got to Fountain Springs, Grindstone, I don't know if it could survive because those areas not only burned hot, but they burned total. In happier times, this is Edith's checker spot on Yerba Santa along the side of a road. And I know that this area, because I visited this area, it is totally burned. I put this picture in just because it was a pretty picture of Larquin's Admiral. And I put this picture in just because it was a pretty picture of California Sister. This would be a butterfly, though I didn't call it one of the special ones because it's really widely distributed, but its caterpillar would have been in any of the oaks that grow in the chaparral, lower montane area. And being that it's a caterpillar, it would not have been able to run away from a fire. Satirids. This is an interesting butterfly. It's called the Nevada Arctic. It takes 2 years for this butterfly to go from egg to adult. It lives on grass. And so an egg that hatches this year will be a caterpillar that will not be able to make it all the way through being a caterpillar. It will hunker down at the end of the summer, wait until next year, continue eating, become a chrysalis, and hatch to an adult. It had a 2-year life cycle. It was fairly common in a couple of areas in the Sierra that I could find it, and in the Lassen area, and in the Trinity area. Finding it in Plaskett Meadows was, again, its southernmost occurrence. And I just don't know that it survived. The areas that I would have been up in Northern California, I know the Trinity area that I used to find it in did burn. I could find it in Butterfly Valley, and that burned up during the Dixie Fire. And the Dixie Fire went into the area of Lassen County that I used to find it in Lassen County. So these are butterflies that even if they didn't survive in the Plaskett Meadows area, assuming their little happy home somehow came back, I don't know if a butterfly could have managed to ever get this far to find it again. I put this butterfly in because it has the unique character of being one of the last full species of butterfly to be described in the United States. When we first started catching this butterfly, we knew that there was something different about it. But it wasn't until the 5th of September in 2012 that it was described as its own species, not its own subspecies, but its own species. And it was flying happily on July 7th when I visited that last time in Plaskett Meadows. Again, it's a grass feeder. And so when the grasslands burn, I don't know if this butterfly would ever be able to survive. The naiads, I just put this in because the spot that I took this picture of this monarch nectaring on milkweed was in the Plaskett Meadows area in that big green meadow that did totally burn up. I put this butterfly in, even though it lived all over California and Oregon and Washington and I mean everywhere in the West Coast. When the August complex fire happened, all of the populations of butterflies that had been in Washington, Oregon, British Columbia would have been flying south. And one of the places that they used to stop was in the Plaskett Meadows area. They would have been flying through as that fire started to burn. And this is what the fire looked like. It was so hot that it actually caused a lot of the sap to boil and blow the barks off the trees. This is what Shapiro says. And I just want you to think about what he's saying here. Only the most agile and broadly adapted species. This means species that could live just about anywhere. Cabbage white, think, painted lady, are likely to recolonize a burned area of 1 million acres anytime in the next half century or more. That's assuming that this area can somehow recover the plant communities that are no longer there. And when I say double whammy, what I mean is that not only did we have fires, but we had drought. We had so little rain last year. Usually plant people, you know, we didn't use fires as being horrible because you talk to a plant person in the before times, you would say, yeah, the area burned. Everybody would be so anxious to go to that area after the fire because you would have had a good wet rain year and you would have had the plants that we call fire followers. Well, there were no fire followers this year. This was going into Plaskett Meadows. This is at a place called Long Point Road. This is overlooking the Grindstone Canyon. And this was in May of this year. So this area had already had a winter after the fire of the year before. And as you can see, only a few plants are green, and those are not fire followers. Those are root sprouts for some of the chaparral shrubs here. But as you look out in the distance, you can see this ridge, there's nothing growing. This ridge, there's nothing growing. This ridge, all you can see is the burned trees at the top, and the far ridge in the back is the same thing. This whole area burned totally. And when you go into the area, this is what you were seeing. This fire was so hot that the ground burned. This is like picking up beach sand. If you've been in any of these thick forests, I mean, you know there was duff on the ground and it had maybe 6 inches of needles and pine needles, and then there would be organic soil. This is like pulling beach sand. This was one of my favorite areas when I call happy home. This used to have a wonderful understory, and along the side of the road was always a wet spot where the little springs had kept a wet area, and so there was always butterflies in this area. This again picture was taken in May and you can see nothing is growing. You'd go around a corner and miraculously there would be a spot maybe the size of my backyard that somehow the fire skipped. So in May, the dogwood was blooming. I sat in this spot specifically just to listen for insects. There was flowers, there was some green leaves, but there was no bees coming to the flowers. There was no sound of any insects flying. It was just deathly quiet. So when I say what's next, what I hear a whole lot about is the reason these fires are so bad is that we never managed the forest. Now, I could tell you, I've been in California my entire life. We've always had the north wind blowing. We've always had fires. This was an attempt in the Plaskett Meadows area to do a forest management. Now, I wish there was some way that they could have known that these trees were not going to be marketable timber when they cut them down. You can see they have to be rotted in the center. So these didn't get hauled out. They were just stacked. Slash was pushed up with caterpillars. So when you hear forest management, you just have to be prepared that there's going to be a lot of trees cut down, and there's going to be a lot of damage to the soil with heavy equipment moving around. So this was done at the end of 2019. This is what the area looked like in May. Those trees, forest management did not help. Those trees crown fired. Those trees burned to the top. Now, if there had been the little Channel 3 helicopter coming over this fire, you would have seen those flames going hundreds of feet in the air. But there was 600 other fires going on, and so nobody was in this area when this was burning. So when I say what is next, I kind of mean, like I say, we've always had forest fires in California. I was never worried that a town was going to burn up in a forest fire 10 years ago. It did not happen. We had fires. We had PG&E with broken wires. We had idiot campers walking away, leaving a campfire going. We had people dragging chains and starting roadside fires. 20 years ago, there was many more people smoking. And so you had fires along the roads where people were throwing out cigarettes. Something is different today. This is a manzanita plant that I used to always like to take pictures of because it was a really pretty plant. I took this picture 2 weeks ago in an area. This did not burn. This was outside of the fire area. This is a manzanita dying because of the drought. I have never seen manzanita die because of the drought. So all of the butterflies that I just showed you are the ones that I kind of consider to be special. Those were just a very few of the 104 species that I actually record there. So how many of those others that we didn't have time to talk about, I don't know. It's going to be real interesting to start seeing how this area recovers and what recovers and will it recover. But when you have drought so severely that you have manzanita dying in an area, I mean, I had just never seen a manzanita die like this. So I'm just hoping that when I start going back, that I might still find something there, because I just don't want to think that everything that I've seen and all the data that I've gathered is just going to be written on a tombstone and not ever be seen by anybody else again. That is it.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg.
So, Bill,
That was really, really amazing. Very interesting. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and put in the chat. I know my personal experience going up to Cold Canyon probably in 2016, 2017, a couple of years after the 2015 fire.
Yeah.
Things were coming back, and I was seeing some butterflies around, and things like looked like they were coming back. And then 2020, the fire came through there, and it was so much hotter, and it just burned everything.
Well, I mean, that was my feeling is when I went to Knoxville last year, I saw oak trees that managed to have not burned in the other fires burned this time. I mean, when you watch the news on Channel 3 and you saw broadleaf oak trees explode just like you would see a conifer explode into flame, I'm thinking these trees are so dry that if they catch on fire, they're going to burn totally. I mean, I saw oak trees above Knoxville that had to be 300-400 years old. This time they caught on fire and this time they burned. And so the conditions now for these fires, I mean, remember when the Dixie Fire crossed and went into the east side, and they said that this was the first time that a fire had burned the west side of the Sierra, crossed and went into the east side. That was the first time that ever happened in California history. 2 weeks later, the Kilgore fire did the exact same thing. And being that those fires were so big, the news never had time to tell us about the fires that right now are going on in the north part of the state. And we're finally now starting to hear about some of the fires that are going on in giant sequoia. I mean, they had to wrap the giant sequoias in tinfoil to keep them from burning. I mean, these are trees that are 3,000 years old, have gone through how many fires? And like I say, it's not just, I mean, the fires, I mean, we like to blame things, but the forests have always been mismanaged. I mean, that's not the reason why they're totally burning up now. They're so dry.
So here's
yeah.
a question.
Okay.
Can you speak about the Marden skipper and its adaptation to fires?
That's not in this area, so I don't study that one.
Okay.
That one is only found in a couple of places that are different from me, so I'm sorry I can't talk to that one.
Are there any species that you think will be better at recovering from these big fires?
To recover, see, first of all, the butterflies that had specific happy homes, if I could use that term again, even if they move into the area, if they don't find that spot like it was before, they're not going to survive there. And so what has to happen is the area, the plant community has to come back. And that's going to be the question is, will some of these plant communities come back? And if you think about some of the, the fun places that would be, like I say, a cool spot in the shade of a huge tree that was hundreds of years old, and you had a little spring there. I mean, you had a very distinct habitat there. Well, if that tree is gone, that shade's not going to be there. So the plant community that's going to come back is not going to be the same plant community that grew there when it was shady and cool and moist. So if that butterfly needed that kind of a community, even if it somehow survives someplace, it's not going to survive 2 or 3 years from now because that community is not there. How long it's going to take these places to recover. So if you're a grassland meadow inhabitant and the grassland comes back, then if that butterfly didn't survive in that particular grassland, if it's close enough that it can get to that spot, it might find that spot. That's going to be the big question when we start going into those areas now that we can finally get back into them, is what kind of a winter are we going to have, and are we going to get a plant community growing? Because like I say, what I was finding in May was not what I would have expected to find after a wet winter, because there just wasn't a wet winter. I mean, just look at what happens in your yard here in town. I mean, everything is so dry that if you water your lawn, for example, your garden, tomorrow it's going to look like you never put water on it because the soil is so dry or so deep that that water just runs into it. I mean, a friend of mine, her horse died. She lives in Janesville, which is outside of Susanville. And it was an old horse, and she was expecting that it wasn't going to be living too long, but it died just at the time they were having to evacuate Janesville because of the fires. Her friend had a backhoe. He came to their property and dug a hole. He dug 15 feet deep with his backhoe to bury the horse. The entire 15 feet down, it was dry dirt. There was no moisture in the soil. So when you have that kind of dryness, even if we get a good wet year, how much of this stuff is going to be able to bounce back? That I can't, I don't have a feel for that yet. I mean, this is so, we use the word unprecedented. And my question now is, at what point in time, using the word unprecedented, do we get to just start saying precedented? Because what we're seeing today is unprecedented. And so all of the experience that I've had, like I say, going in there 60 years, I don't feel like what I've seen is going to be too much of a clue as to what I'm going to see when I go in there next year. I can go to all of my favorite places and hope to see something. But let's put it this way, it'll probably make a real interesting talk in maybe 1 or 2 years from now to do a repeat of this talk and just see what 1 or 2 years has actually done.
Yeah, I know with fires, especially big fires, it's not necessarily flame that kills plants or trees in particular. It's actually the heat from the fire all around it. Even if the tree doesn't burn, the heat nearby will kill the tree. But there's a question from Jeanette I've been wondering myself. Is it the poor air quality? How does that affect insects? Even if they're far enough away or they're in a place where it's not actually burning and maybe they can even survive the heat. Does the poor air quality affect them?
Jeanette, I can't even answer that because I don't know that anybody has been able to figure that out, because the kind of air quality that we've had the last 2 years, I mean, think of what the air looked like when we were having the August complex fire. I mean, Davis, it was raining ash in Davis. The moon was yellow, orange. I mean, it was a sight that we've never seen before. And I don't know that anybody could even answer that question because we've not really had this situation happen before.
And
so,
you've been talking specifically about butterflies, but I was extending that to other insects. So for moths, for example, Corky was asking about moths.
Well, I can tell you kind of the general rule is for every species of butterfly, there's probably 10 to 15 species of moths out there. For every species of butterfly, there's untold numbers of beetles. There's untold numbers of wasps. There's untold bees. I chose butterflies just because they were big, noticeable, and it was easy to do because I had, like I say, I had a lot of resource for it. But what happened to the butterflies happened to the bees, happened to the wasps, happened to everything else that was out there. I mean, when you had a fire that burned the ground, you know, how many things that live in the ground survived? I mean, I don't know that anybody can answer that question because this area wasn't studied all that much. I mean, Shapiro went into the area a little bit, a couple of times with me, but this was not part of his transect. every time I took a different entomology student with me, whether it would be a fly person, a bee person, a wasp person, a beetle person, they would find things that they would go, wow, this is cool. So I just assumed that a whole lot of different entomologists have not been in this area. But it's a difficult area to get into. I mean, when I would go into that area, I would have to pick which spot I was going to go to, and it was going to take a day to do that. And so that meant driving 3 or 4 hours to get all the way back in there. And unless you were camping back there, and a lot of these places, it wasn't easy to camp in some of these areas. So it was a journey to get in and a journey to do a sampling of the area and then to get back into town and record what we've seen. So I just, like I say, my thought when I saw some of those fires is I just said, there's billions of insects dying.
And is there any way to know if there's actually been species extinctions in the last couple of years?
No. I mean, if probably, you know, I mean, when I say the bumblebee that everybody was looking for up north used to be a common bumblebee that now was, when they put it on the endangered species list a couple of days ago or weeks ago, is probably extinct. I mean, there you're talking a bee that's the size of the end of your thumb. It's easily seen. I mean, just think of all the millions of things that are out there that aren't easily seen. And so, no, I have no idea. The butterflies that were there, other than that one, other than that one satura that I said was just named from the area, if that became extinct, that would be a true extinction. The Pierra that I said was the late flying pine white. If that did not survive, that would be a true extinction because as far as we know, that did not appear anyplace else. That one little blue butterfly that I called lupini, I gave a species of that 3 years ago to Paul Oppler, who was going to be doing DNA on it to see if that matched the other lupini that are described from other parts, to see if it warranted a name. I haven't heard back to know whether that was only found in a very few places, and the places that I knew to find it and checked all totally burned, and whether it survived, I can't tell you. So we won't really know for a few years, because just going back this year to find something flying, it might be something that came out, managed to survive the fire, flies, but if it didn't find a place to be happy in, it didn't really survive. So it might have survived, but it not long-term survived.
So with insects, is there something like a long-term seed bank that wildflowers might have where they could last more than 1 year? They have to come out every year.
They don't have to come out every year, but it's very impossible for the average person to keep it in the state of survival. So there's a little swallowtail here called the anise swallowtail that lives on carrots and parsley and anise. I mean, Zelican is its proper name. I had a Zelican that I found as a caterpillar in the backyard. I brought it in, I raised it, it made a chrysalis, and I expected the chrysalis next spring to emerge. It did not. And it did not emerge. I had it on my desk and it didn't emerge a year later. And so I would take that chrysalis, I figured it had died. So I would take that chrysalis, it was my example chrysalis. If I gave a talk to Native Plant Society or one of the plant societies, I would take it, I would say, this is a chrysalis for a swallowtail. And I said, notice how it's kind of at an angle like this off the twig. It makes it look like a twig so that something that finds it in wintertime when all the leaves have fallen off the tree will just think it's a twig. 5 or 6 years later, it emerged. I found it as an adult butterfly in the window of my house.
Wow.
And so this diapause stage can last for many years sometimes afterwards. So for example, the pipevine swallowtail that you would have, if you've got pipevine growing in your yard, the pipevine swallowtail that we find in the valley here or in the foothills, it can emerge at any one time in 3 times during the year. So it can have a spring flight, a summer flight, and a fall flight, or it can hang over for a year or 2 or 3, which means that any 2 butterflies that are mating in any one given year can be made up of one adult that emerged from a few months ago and an adult that emerged from a few years ago. So what that builds into that species is this potential of being able to survive a 1 or 2 year catastrophe and still be alive. Now that's because that butterfly is a chrysalis. Now, some butterflies, this is as an adult, which means that they pretty much have to fly the next year. They cannot last more than 1 year as an adult. So if they're a butterfly that lives through the winter in diapause as an adult, think a morning cloak. Come next spring, if it's a warm day, it can come out and fly around and say, oops, it's just a warm day in the middle of winter. I'm going back to where I was. I don't think that butterfly could live 2 years. So some butterflies might have what you consider to be a seed bank. But again, these are things that people just really haven't studied enough to know for sure. So anybody that's played with them will have just what I just told you, an anecdotal little story, but actually sitting down and doing this in a rigorous fashion to say this is what is possible. Not really. Now, I could just talk, the roaches that I have here in Davis that are in my garage. I'll step on them every time I see them, and I have done nothing to lessen the population size of those things. So there are certain things that will survive anything. But the butterflies that I gave, the little extra talk on, the ones that I consider to be special, those I don't think have that kind of resilience. These were ones that had managed to somehow hang on in a little happy home spot in the various places that existed in the inner coast range. And whether there was another happy home spot that butterfly survived, not next to a road that I was at, or something that I could easily visit, that's what we're going to find out. So like I say, maybe in 2 or 3 years, to redo this talk and just say, okay, this is what we saw the first year, this is what the second year was, and this is what the third year is. So maybe there is, insects, just because they're still here, have a degree of resilience. But when you just think how much of California is burned up right now, when you look at the 1 million+ acres, I was kidding people, but I wasn't too far off when I said after the August complex, you could start south of I-80 in the Vacaville area where the fire jumped I-80, and you could walk all the way to the Trinity Alps, crossing Highway 36, and be on ash the whole time. I wasn't too far off. And so when you figure that area burned, and any of us that have done this inner coast range, you know how different the habitat is on this side compared to when you're on the ocean side. So those species aren't going to be happy crossing over and trying to re-inhabit my area of the inner coast range. My area of the inner coast range would have been, if the Plaskett Meadows area hadn't burned, there's certain species that were there that would be able to go into the Goat Mountain area and re-inhabit those areas when they finally came back. But when you figure Knottsville is gone, the whole area around Berryessa is gone, a lot of the area on the other side towards Gwenda and that area is gone. when you figure how much of Walker Ridge, Bear Valley, Goat Mountain, Snow Mountain, Plaskett Meadows, all the way up through the Olobolis. I mean, where is this stuff going to come from to re-inhabit these areas? And so if something happened to survive, it's going to need to find plants and an area that it's going to like. And that is the big question.
And if it has to come from the boundaries of these fires, it's going to take a long, long time to get into the interior.
Yes. And so when I said the little Arctic skipper, which was the southernmost occurrence anywhere in the world for that particular butterfly, it just meant that it somehow, as climate changed over the millennium, it had found a cool little spot in the Plaskett Meadows area that somehow met its requirements. It wasn't evenly distributed everywhere. I had to go to the spot that I knew to find it. That area is not there anymore. It burned up. So even if there was a spot that that butterfly was happy in someplace else that I wasn't able to find it, is it going to be able to find another area to live in? So it's not only surviving the fire, it's surviving the amount of time that it's going to take for this place to recover. That is the big question. So did anybody else have questions for you?
I was muted. I apologize. There's a question from Jean asking, what should we all be doing? And the thought that comes to my mind is the insects are not going to come back until the plants come back, and the plants won't come back until the rain comes back. And the rain coming back is probably a function of climate change. So
just to make sure that the politicians realize that we all believe that climate change is true. And that if they want to do something about it, we're going to help get that across, that there has to be something done about it. I mean, they were interviewing and replaying parts of Inconvenient Truth. Was that the name of the movie that Al Gore did, An Inconvenient Truth?
Many years ago.
He was saying, yeah, when I said that, just like when I was saying, I expected to see some degree of change in my lifetime. I did not think that I was going to be seeing big change in my lifetime. I had kind of had this hope that it was all going to just be small changes here and there, that I could just, maybe there would be a little small fire and I would go someplace else. Wait until the fire recovered.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Greg. I don't see any other questions. If anybody has any other questions.
Somebody said dead soils, what?
Yeah, I think you touched on that the fire was hot enough so it actually burned the soil.
Yeah.
And one question is how deep did it burn the soil? I know one thing that I saw just a few weeks after the fire in Cold Canyon. I was up in that area that burned very, very hot. And I saw carcasses of ground squirrels and stuff that had burned. But I also saw a lizard running around on the ash. So somehow it had survived the fire, I assume by getting deep enough into the soil.
I mean, we just have to hope that there are soil that survived and that there is something in the places that survived that are going to be able to, recolonize the places that everything was totally burned. Like I say, when I had that one view from Log Point and looked out over the Grindstone Canyon, and as far as I could see, because I threw the telephoto lens on that far ridge, hoping that maybe those trees that were in the distance were green, but they were burned. And when you have an area that huge burning, I mean, to repopulate something, it has to be able to come from somewhere and find some reason to stay. And that's what was my main worry, is that even if something survived, did the plant survive? How long is it going to take some of those plant communities to come back? I mean, it's really, I remember the first little fire that I ever had a chance to go visit was a fire up in the Walker Ridge area. And it was actually kind of cool because it did what I thought fires were supposed to do. It burned some areas, but it left a whole lot of areas unburned. And we had a nice wet rain after the fire. And the area was full of what we called fire followers. I mean, it was just a beautiful display of flowers and plants that sometimes hadn't been seen since the last fire. I had hoped to see that when I went into, the whole Plaskett area in May. I was hoping to see a lot of wildflowers. But it just appeared that these last fires were so hot and burned the soil so much that there was no fire followers. I mean, the whole drive into Ladoga, when you take that road out of Maxwell into Ladoga Canyon, I mean, you go through some older fires in there. And again, that chaparral, that should have had a lot of fire followers in there. And there just was not anything growing. So hopefully, like I say, hopefully in maybe 3 years, we can do this again and I'll have something by saying, oh yes, look, it survived. But you all know this country. And so you're going to be going into this country yourself and you're going to see, you're going to be seeing what I'm seeing. And what I will just say to you is butterflies are not that hard to learn. If you get the little book that Shapiro did called Butterflies of the San Francisco Bay Area, it will pretty much give you identifications of anything that you could see, and just pay attention to them. The nice thing about butterflies is that they're big, usually. You can see them usually clearly. And if you've got an iPhone today, you can take a picture of something. And if you get a picture of it and throw it on iNat, somebody will tell you what it is. And so just start paying attention to what you're seeing, and that's what I hope this kind of a talk will get people doing, is just thinking about, as you see things, appreciate what you're seeing, because it has changed. And we just hope that a lot of what I just showed you is still going to be there somewhere. Because when I first gave these talks a couple of years ago, it was hopefully sharing all of the cool things that were there. Now I'm giving the talk and saying, hopefully these cool things are still there, and go out and find them. Take pictures of them. Pay attention to what you're seeing. I mean, when you start seeing, if you see blooming flowers and there's not a lot of blooming flowers, if there's any pollinators about, they will be where those blooming flowers are. Take pictures of them. I mean, it's that very first picture that I showed of me deer hunting. That was the only picture that I had not taken myself. That was a 35mm slide that my dad took in 1960, and I scanned to be able to include it. Everything else that you saw were pictures that I've taken either with iPhone or digital cameras. We now have the ability to take pictures easier than ever before. The early days when I was first in there, it was black and white film or color film, which was very expensive. I mean, when you took that picture, that cost, in 1960 dollars, that cost about $1 per slide. In 1960, you did not waste dollar slides taking lots of pictures. So today, pay attention to what you're going to be seeing in that area, take pictures of it, try to identify it. Bill has a way of getting in touch with me, or else go through Bohart. Bohart has got plenty of website stuff. You can find that UC Davis easily. And
yeah, this talk is recorded. And we're going to be putting it up on the Tuleyome YouTube channel, and I will have Greg's email address in the description. So if you want to get a
Yeah,
hold of Greg.
so anybody, just, if you email me, just say, somewhere in the title of the email, just put regarding the talk of butterflies, and I'll definitely see it. It won't go to spam, and I'll answer whatever question. And if you've got pictures, I can identify pictures. And I know we kind of said that I was going to try to talk about dragonflies. There's a lot of cool dragonflies in the area, but I just did not have the time to include the dragonfly part here. So maybe some point in the future, we'll do a dragonfly.
That would be great.
Of that area, because that's also, there's some special stuff there too.
Yeah, I imagine that Plaskett Meadows, when it's got a lot of water in it, it's probably got plenty of dragonflies.
Strangely enough, Bill, there are dragonflies there, and I did in that Plaskett Meadows area add a couple of county records, but most of the dragonflies that are going to be in that area are associated with a big lake, which means they're kind of common, and they can be found in many places. It's the little seeps and the small streams that has the really cool special stuff.
Okay.
But like I say, that could be another talk sometime.
Wonderful. So we'll have this video up next week. So thank you, Greg, and thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Yeah, thank you for all coming. And like I say, just pay attention to what you're seeing, because there's a lot of cool stuff out there, and we hope that it's still there.
And go up to the National Monument, even if it's a little bit burned up, even if it's very burned up. You can go up and see how it changes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you, Bill.
Bye, everybody.